Hi, everyone. For our latest segment of the Astoria Mutual Aid Community Spotlight series, I recently spoke with Katie Mulligan, Astoria Mutual Aid's very own champion for voter registration and the 2020 census. Katie has lived in Astoria for 8 years, active with Astoria Mutual Aid since March, and voter registration since 2017. Katie is an expert on the 2020 census and New York State voter registration, providing great insight on the significance of the census and the importance of voting. So if you're on the fence of why you should do either or simply looking for ways to help out, enjoy our latest spotlight with Katie Mulligan. Okay, hi Katie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Daniel?
I'm good. Thanks for taking the time to talk with me today and about voter registration and the census.
Of course.
I guess the first question I have is, um, how long have you lived in Astoria, and what does it mean to be a part of the Astoria community, like an Astorian neighbor, if you will?
Sure. I've been in Astoria for about 8 years, and when I first moved to Astoria, something just clicked. It was like, oh, this is home. Like it's just something about the neighborhood, the community, how diverse it is, the people here, the geography of the neighborhood. It felt so right and perfect, and I'm so grateful to it because also it's given me some amazing opportunities to advocate on behalf of the neighborhood. And yeah, I love Astoria. Astoria is home to me.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I moved to Astoria about 15 years ago.
Oh,
Moved to
nice.
Brooklyn for about 3 years and had to come back to Astoria. I agree. Yeah, it feels like a small town,
Yeah,
and
that's a great way to put it.
just seeing how um, it has changed over the years. And you've been here for 8 years, so you
Yeah.
definitely have seen that, but I still feel like it is that home, and so from one historian to the other, you know, first of all, again, I'll keep saying thank you, but thank you for being this great neighbor.
No,
Um, and so how long have you been with Astoria Mutual Aid?
since March, I started. I saw posting looking for dispatchers, and I don't know about you. I was having like the worst allergy season ever during the first part of COVID, which is terrifying because I'm like, is this it? I'm not sure, but I want to help, and I can't leave my apartment. So I started dispatching for Astoria Mutual Aid, and being a dispatcher, it means you're on call for about 4 hours a shift, answering help requests and deploying volunteers as needed. And it just felt so good to be able to do that from the comfort of my home and feel like I was being of service to my neighborhood. And it's been great to kind of watch how that has developed. And we formed all these additional teams, and they're still looking for dispatchers. So if you want to do something to help the neighborhood from the comfort of your couch, being a dispatcher for Astoria Mutual Aid is a great thing to do.
And so you started out as dispatch,
Mm-hmm.
and you said, teams have grown out of Astoria Mutual Aid, and one of those teams, or two of those teams, maybe, are voter registration and getting people to register for the census. So tell me, how did you navigate towards that? What drew you to those two services?
It was kind of an interesting what's the word I'm looking for? Conjunction of events. So I got involved in voter registration shortly after Charlottesville. I around that time I heard that most people who aren't registered to vote have never been asked if they're registered to vote, and I thought that's something I can do. And I have no shame. I could go up to people and be like, hey, are you registered to vote at your current address? And I had posted on Hearts Across Queens at that time, and Megan Stotts and Aisha Gomez from Hearts Across Queens answered all my questions. Megan met me at like the Rite Aid on 30th Ave and gave me a ton of forms. And I set up a little table outside the N train, shuttle buses, because the N train wasn't running that summer, and just registered voters. And it made me feel so good. And after that, I got involved with the League of Women Voters, which is a fantastic nonpartisan civic education, voting reform, voting registration organization. Love the League of Women Voters. Check them out. And they trained me on voter registration because there's been updates to New York State voting laws. And when Socrates Sculpture Park started, they had been planning their Monuments Now series for this summer. They had reached out to Hearts Across Queens and said, hey, do you know of anybody who would be interested in doing voter registration? And they connected me with, they connected us because they knew I was a huge nerd about it. But then COVID happened and the park closed and things shifted, and League of Women Voters, I was going to do it in partnership with them, stopped all in-person outreach, obviously because of COVID. And when the park reopened, they reached out and they said, can you still do this? And I had said, well, let me reach out to Astoria Mutual Aid. Let me see if there's any volunteers who'd be interested. And boy, there were. I was so grateful. We've trained over 20 people, volunteers, on how to register voters. And we were able to still make this commitment. And we're at Socrates Sculpture Park Thursday and Friday nights, 5:30 to close, and Saturday mornings, 10 to 1, registering voters, encouraging people to complete the census. It's been a lovely way to spend the summer, but also to connect with neighbors, and it's also something really important. So I'm just so grateful from all of the different organizations in this community and New York City that allowed me to be able to do this service, and that we're all working together to have this benefit for the neighborhood.
So that leads me into the census then. So, voter registration and the census are two huge parts of the way the government works. And how, when you're talking to people about registering for either of them, how cognizant or how understanding are people of the process and understanding of the importance of these two mechanisms?
So I'll take the census first because I feel like that's the one that people may not be the most aware of. And there's been, this is something that happens every 10 years. It's been done every 10 years since 1790. And it's an accounting of all persons in the United States. It doesn't matter if you're a citizen, green card holder, undocumented. It's just for us to know how many people are in that area. And that determines everything from federal funds that we receive for our schools, for hospitals, the number of representatives that we have for our area in Congress. It's really important. So it helps us identify how many resources we get. And there was a lot of challenges with the census this year. There was discussion around putting a citizenship question on the census, which unfortunately was a way to discourage people from, because let's say, for example, we don't get our full accounting of everybody here. That means we're getting less money and less representation, and our voices are being lessened. Also, with the census, normally we would have census takers going out in the spring, and they're just out there now. I've actually seen 2 census takers in the neighborhood going door to door. Also, a large number of people left New York City and Queens, whether it's to go to second homes or maybe to go take care of a sick relative, and didn't respond to the census. So just to give you a little example, I believe New York State's response rate for this census was 70% last year. Right now, Queens is at 55%. So imagine if it was a salary, for example, you only getting 55% of your salary, even though you're doing 100% of the work, you would not be happy. And another thing about the census that I just want to highlight is that kids under the age of 5 are one of the most undercounted groups in the census. Yeah. And that is rough, because when that kid is counted again, that's 10 years later, and they're already in school age, and they're already in school and they're school age, and we may not have enough resources for that kid. So, and a lot of people fear the census because it's a government entity collecting information, but it is 100% private. It is federal crime to share any information, personally identifying information in the census. And any information that you include in the census cannot be used against you by a government entity or in any court of law. So it's about taking away that fear of the census, making sure everybody responds, and it's really being of service. And it doesn't take that long. It's like 10 to 12 questions. You could do it online now. So when we see people in person at the park, we have a little QR code and we just have them fill it, respond to the census in front of us. And just by doing that, you are being a huge help to our area and to the country as a whole, because we'll then have a better accounting. So talk to your friends, ask them, hey, did you complete the census? Because another thing that changed with the census is the self-response deadline has been moved up by a month. It was supposed to be the end of October. You now have until the end of September to respond to the census. So please, please, please take that moment. Go to my2020census.gov, and you can actually, I'm double checking that it's the correct website. Yeah, you can go to, where is it? Sorry, this is the nice little card that I got from the League of Women Voters. Yes, it is my2020census.gov. To respond to the census, click respond, click start questionnaire. It may ask you for a census ID that would have been mailed out in March and April. If you don't have it, don't worry. Just hit click here if you do not have a census ID and complete it.
So
That was
with
a lot
this,
of information. Sorry.
no, that's okay. That's great. A lot of people don't really understand what the census is for,
Yeah.
and I think that that's really important for them to know. I, for one, just want to ask you a quick question about the self-response. So you said that's by September 20th. So
September 30th.
September 30th. So the census is not something that I can fill out just by the end of the year. That's something that has to be filled out by a certain date. Is that
Yes, that is
okay?
correct.
Okay, because that's really interesting to know. A lot of people kind of like returning a book to the library, just wait until the last minute or go over the line and whatnot. So I think that's really important for people to know that. And thank you for explaining, like, with a 5-year-old child, when you talk about the census and how it applies to education resources, that's huge. And those are not just education resources. Those are any kind of public good.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's money going to hospitals, federal funds for food programs. With mutual aid, we're helping a lot with food assistance. And imagine if we undercounted how many people were here and we weren't getting enough benefits for the people that are here. So just by completing those questions, you are helping the neighborhood and you're doing a service to everybody here.
Well, I could ask you probably like 18 questions just based on what you've just said. Not that you didn't explain enough. It's just I have a lot of, opinion questions. But I think let's talk about voter registration. Voter registration is a different beast of its own, and I think there's just as much confusion and misinformation on voter registration. And so, how, when you talk to people at your events or at Socrates Park and whatnot, how knowledgeable are people about voter registration, or, hate to say it, had to ask it, do they even care at first when you do talk to them?
It's definitely a mixed bag. So when we ask people at the park, when we're doing voter registration, the first thing we ask is, hey, are you registered to vote at your current address? We say current address because New Yorkers move around a lot, and updating your registration is something you forget. You can't do it online at this time. There is, I believe, a piece of legislation in the New York State Legislature and committee about making online voter registration available. You have to print out a form and mail it in. We instead have the forms on hand. And so people forget. And then another thing we have is some people feel discouraged. Like, my vote doesn't count. I don't like the choices. And I love to give this example. So, for example, in the 2016 election, the biggest voting block in the 2016 election were people who didn't vote. So I like to give this comparison of, let's think of 10 people going out to dinner for a restaurant, pre-COVID, of course, and imagine three people determining where you're going to eat that night because you just didn't vote. And maybe you end up at a restaurant that you don't really like. You don't like anything on the menu, or heck, you might even be allergic to everything on the menu um, because you weren't part of the process. And I think just having as much participation as possible by far will give everybody better choices and better outcomes. And just by voting, and not just in presidential election years, that's where we see the biggest number of voters, but also in local races. Those will have the biggest impact on your day to day life. So just I will say there have been some great changes to New York State voting laws over the past couple of years that are making easier. You have early voting. I love early voting. The first time I early voted, I went to brunch with friends, went to the Museum of Moving Image, cast my vote, and then went to the movies instead of like waking up early on a Tuesday morning praying that I get to work on time after voting. And now we have the absentee voting option. And that is, I would say, there's probably still going to be some updates to absentee ballot voting for the November general election. But as of this moment, in order to request an absentee ballot, you have to go to vote.nyc and download the application, mail it in, and then they will mail you your absentee ballot. It's different. Oops, sorry, there goes my air conditioner. It's different than what it was in June. It may, where you could apply for your application online, it may go to that, but you can, for the November general election, still choose temporary illness or fear of COVID as a reason to vote by absentee ballot, which is great. There's other things like 16 and 17-year-olds can pre-register to vote. That's a new voting change. So there's things that are changing that are for the better that I'm hoping will make people less discouraged to be part of the process. But I just want people to be excited about the process and to partake, because otherwise you're going to end up in a really crappy restaurant that you don't like and not enjoying your evening. Now think of that as a legislative term or presidential term, all because you just sat at home. So
Well, it's as I was preparing for this interview, I went back and I looked at a survey done by the Pew Charitable Trust back in 2016. So it was before the 2016 general election. And there were a number of things that people said of reasons why they haven't registered to vote. And a lot of those reasons are reasons that you just stated: less interested in politics, less engaged. Some of them are less engaged in civic activities in general. And a big one was they were more cynical about their ability to understand and influence government. So that there's this kind of a loss of not really understanding how the government runs and how their voting actually affects that. And so that being said, one of the things that Pew did discover was with the younger voting bloc that had not registered to vote, they said they may be interested to vote if they were motivated to, right? The last 4 years, for a number of reasons, to me has been, geeking out here, has been a lesson in civics, a lesson in how the government runs, a lesson of what the division of powers actually means, the checks and balances of powers, if you will. And I feel like if people didn't listen in high school or middle school to their civics lesson, they're certainly getting it now, right? Looking back at that statement, are people more motivated to vote now?
I will say that's definitely a reaction that we're getting from people, and people being excited. And like, for example, the second question we ask people when we're doing voter registration is, hey, have you voted in the last 5 years? The reason why we ask that is because if you haven't voted in 5 years, there's a good chance that you may have been moved to the inactive voter rolls. So when you go to the polls, your name might not be in the book, and then you have to vote by affidavit ballot. So we ask people that question. And if they haven't, and even if their information hasn't changed from the last time they voted, we still encourage them to re-register to vote so that they're on the active voter rolls and have a seamless process at the polls. And also civics is not being taught as much in schools. So I think people are really wanting that education and are asking questions about it, which is great. But I also think that a lot of people are counting on, certain candidates are counting on people to be checked out, to stay at home, to be discouraged, because it's easier that way. Imagine if you only had to cater to like a certain part of the motivated voter pool, but if you have everybody part of the process, then you really have to make sure that you have the best interest of everybody at heart. And yeah, people are excited, and it's great. So we give out stickers when we do voter registration. I cannot tell you how excited, like, 56-year-old men are like, I get a sticker. I'm like, yes, you get a sticker for being a good neighbor because you're registered to vote and you completed the census, because we want people to be excited about it. Like, this is an exciting thing. It determines a lot about our quality of life and where we want to see our country go and where we want to see our neighborhood go. So get excited, because by showing up to the polls, by voting, by filling out the census, you are being of service to yourself and your neighbors.
So that being said, obviously it's important for people to register to vote. It's important for people to fill out the census. And there is more motivation for that, especially during this year.
Mm-hmm.
Like before we talked, we talked a little bit about, like, in the last 4 years it's motivated people, and then in the last 4 months, like, exponentially. But what are some of the challenges that you have faced in trying to get people to register to vote and fill out the census? What are some of those, maybe some barriers, maybe some behavioral barriers? What are some things that you're kind of coming up against?
So with the census, especially for people that aren't citizens, just not knowing about it. I've had to educate a lot of people. We've had to educate a lot of people about the census, thinking that it wasn't something they were able to do. I actually really love. It's been so fun registering voters during the census, because you have people, especially when you're like, when you're asking, hey, are you registered to vote? And they go, oh, I'm not a citizen. And you can kind of see it, if they feel dinged a little bit. But then I go, hey, but wait, did you fill out the census? That's something you can do. And they're like, what's the census? And I'm like, here's this. And they're like, oh, I can fill this out. And then I give them a sticker, and then they get really excited. So education about that. And in terms of voter registration, I think some people just feel discouraged. They feel like, oh, I don't vote. I think all politicians are crooks, or I don't think my vote matters. And with that, I say, well, I think it's because people are counting on you to be discouraged. Imagine if everybody was part of the process. I think the quality of candidates would go up. I think more people paying attention, would fundamentally change the options that you have. And what we've said, there was someone who was like, oh, I'm not voting in this election. And one of our volunteers said, well, do you want to register in case you change your mind? And that hooked them. And because you may change your mind, and I hope and our voter registration drives are nonpartisan. We want as many people to be engaged in the process. Like, I have my own beliefs, but I want people to vote for who resonates with them. Obviously, I want it to go a certain way, but I leave that at the door, because I just want them to be part of the process, because voting is a very adult thing you have to do. Sometimes you have to weigh the pros and cons. I've had experiences where I've had to vote for people that maybe I didn't think they were that great, but they were slightly better than the other person. it asks us to make hard choices, but that's life. Sometimes we have to make hard choices, and it can't just be something as easy as a BuzzFeed quiz about like which cottage will describe your personality style. It sometimes requires you to really think things out. But that's part of the process. And I think that's why it makes it so important.
Yeah, I really love what you said about we have to make tough choices, and I think that the last couple of elections have really shown that on both the national level and on really on all levels, is that you are going to be confronted with two candidates that you're, instead of asking yourself which one's the best, you're saying, well, which one's not the worst, right? But I think, as history has shown, that's a big difference. That is a really important, even if you have to ask yourself, who is worse, right? Because the last 4 months has shown the importance of having competent leadership on a local level, on a state level, and on a national level, and on a global level for that matter. And I think that all government, all localities worldwide are reeling right now from some leadership that just obviously just they were not ready for this. And they were not ready for this kind of challenge. And then you've seen other countries and other locales where the leadership just said, we got to do what we got to do, and we're going to get through this, and it's not going to be fun, but we're going to do it, and it didn't mean that you liked that politician. It didn't mean you didn't have to like them. You just had to go, okay, I may not like them, but at least they have a good head on their shoulders, right? So a couple more questions. This has been great. And again, I have like 100,000 questions, but we'll keep it short.
Bring it on.
So I really like how you did talk about when you went through the challenges. You also talked about those surprises that you've had, and I think that that's another thing, is I think we underestimate people a lot, and being on that, being personally engaged with people on a very regular basis. Have people surprised you by their all they needed to do was just be asked, I guess?
Yeah. And also, I think, especially because it's a presidential campaign year, I think people are surprised that we're doing this to be as nonpartisan. We had someone come up to us like, I'm not voting for any blah 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 candidates, and I don't try and get me to vote. And we just said, hey, we're nonpartisan. You do you. And they were like, oh, like it took whatever, they were spoiling for a fight, and we were just like, well, it's your opinion. We just want you to be part of the process. And it just relaxed them. And that was surprising, just seeing. It was just like, no, I just want you to be part of the process. I'm not here to force you to do anything or convince you to do otherwise. And it changed their mindset, which was really great. So yeah, I think just being like, no, we want everybody to be part of the process. We want you to be educated. We want to hear what you think. And you do that by going to the polls, has been really important.
Now, with that kind of engagement that you have with the community in both the voter registration and filling out the census, if somebody wants to help out, what do you need, and where can they find you?
So if you go to AstoriaMutualAid.com, you will find a Give Help option where you can sign our volunteer form. And there is an option for civic engagement, so voter registration, census outreach. I will then email you on Mondays. We have a shift sign up, and you can just pick which shifts you'd be willing to volunteer for. If you haven't registered voters before, not to worry. We will train you. It's a lot of fun. You will learn lots of nerdy things about voting and the form, and uh, you know, all the different requirements. I love training people. And then from there, you can even do your own voter registration drive. So if you want to go somewhere, you'll be ready to go. We can teach you how to do it. And it's a lot of fun. And especially with the Socrates stuff, it's been great hanging out that here at like sunset, asking people, giving out stickers, thanking people for being good neighbors. I mean, ideally, all I want to do is just give out stickers, because I want everybody to be like, yeah, registered to vote, voted the last 5 years, and I completed the census. And that's great. So yeah, the more the merrier. It's a lot of fun, and we definitely want you to be part of the team.
So one last question, and that's what gets you up in the morning? What puts a smile on your face? What drives you out the door? I obviously, I think I know a number of these answers, but what's you've been a part of Astoria community for 8 years. Where do you find your passion and your calling, and what drives you?
I think the biggest thing is just focusing on, I want to be of service to this community and the people in it. And I don't know, I joke, I'm trying to figure out how I and why I have this huge passion for voter registration and civic engagement. I joke sometimes that maybe I was a suffragette in a previous life, but like this is like my nerd territory, and I'm grateful that this is a useful niche nerd territory that I could deploy as a way to being of service to the neighborhood. And that really gets me going. And we just did our 12th voter registration drive. We've been doing it for a month at Socrates. We're going to keep doing it at least until Labor Day, if not later. We're helping to educate people. Starting this week, we are going to be giving out absentee ballot applications to people at our setups, and hoping to have more details for people about the process once that gets released. So yeah, it's just, I love this place. I just want to advocate like hell for it, and this is the one of the ways I can do it, because it's just a great place to live and be a part of.
Well, Katie, thank you for being a part of it, and thank you for doing this. Especially during this time, you being a dispatcher, being engaged, you're just an amazing person. So thank you for giving to Astoria Mutual Aid, which means thank you for giving to the community. And I think we're getting through it together, and it will be interesting to see where this heads us, where we head with this. But thank you again, Katie, for taking the time to speak with me and for everything you do. And again, if you we'll do one quick shout out, like again, if people can't get to Socrates Park, they want to fill out the census, where do they go real quick? And if they want to vote, where do they go real quick?
So in order to complete the census, you need to go to my2020census.gov, and they'll click on respond, then start questionnaire. It's going to ask you for a census ID. It would have been mailed to you back in March and April, but some people didn't get it. Not a problem. Just click here if you don't have a census ID. If you need to update your voter registration, go to vote.nyc, and you can download an application. You can also download an absentee ballot application if you want to vote by absentee in the November general election. And ask your friends. So I'm going to say the 3 questions that we asked the voter reg, and I want you to ask your friends and family too. Number 1, Hey, are you registered to vote at your current address? No? Okay, go to votenyc.org. Hey, have you voted in the last 5 years? Oh, you haven't? Oh, that's okay. No pressure. But just go and update your voter registration. Or if you go to vote.nyc, you could check your voter status to find out if you're active or inactive. And lastly, did you complete the census? Oh, you didn't? Go to my2020census.gov and help out your neighbors and do that before September 30th. So, yeah, and then tell them thanks for being a good neighbor because we're all in this together.
That's awesome. That's great. Katie, thank you. And I'll probably come by and see you at Socrates Park one day.
That's
So,
great. I'll give you an elbow bop and a sticker for being a good neighbor.
oh, absolutely. Cool. Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye.